Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PanicNot After Dark with Justice Arman, who I'm very excited to have here tonight. Uh, I think I know that I have been following you on Twitter for a while, and there are a few people in the audience here. Actually, there's Alika who also kind of spoke about you, and then when we spoke to Ajit, he was very impressed by a lot of your work, and
Mm.
we were like, okay, we really wanted to just talk to you and kind of get you here, and just get a little nerdy with TTRPGs, and but also
Yeah,
like learn a little bit.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, Ajit is awesome, and it was so um, humbling when he said anything about me because I'm a big fan of him and all the work that he does. So that was very sweet.
yeah, yeah. We just had such a good time with him, and I think he's been a big help, and he's been a huge support as well. So yeah.
Yeah,
So let's get started, I guess. Um, so since we've been talking for the last half an hour
yeah,
before
yeah.
this,
Mhm.
and I think a good place to start would be to just talk about like where did your kind of, maybe we can call it a tryst or this relationship with TTRPGs kind of start.
Yeah, I would say it probably started in 2013. So 8 years ago now was my first time playing a TTRPG. I was out at a college in Utah, and I had this guy who lived in my apartment complex who came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to play D&D this Sunday or whatever?" And I was like, "Is that game where you're in a basement and you have the little paper thing in front of you and you dress up?" And he's like, "That's kind of what it is." He's like, "Not exactly, but yeah." And I threw out some weird character concept, and I was like, "Could I play this?" And there's a minotaur, and he had a powdered wig and played the harpsichord. And he was like, "Yeah, come on over like an hour early. We'll make that character, and then we'll go." And so I was like, "Okay." And we ended up playing with them for multiple semesters, and eventually I started DMing from there, and then that kind of grew into the writing that I started. Um, Back in around 2019.
Oh, okay, yeah, 5 6 years. Yeah, it
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
feels like a cult sometimes, no? Like when people invite you, because it's like at least now I know that people go online to kind of look for D&D because they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I've heard of this, but I don't know anyone in this country that plays, so I'm gonna go online and find and look for something. But usually it's just like, hey, you want to come play a game because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
looking for players, I don't have enough players.
Yeah, it does feel strangely religious at times in the way that you kinda tell them about it. You don't wanna scare them with anything at
Yeah,
first.
yeah,
You get them there, you show them it, yeah, yeah. You put all your
yeah.
best stuff first. You're like, "Hey, look, I have Dwarven Forge. Aren't these cool?" And they're like, "Wow, these are really cool." You're like, "Sit down here. I made you a character."
Yeah, that is exactly how I think my experience has also been with it. um
I like it though. It's funny, and I went I we used to have missionaries that would come over to our house so frequently, and the parallels between trying to get somebody to play a tabletop game and what missionaries do is very similar. Eventually, you hope that the person that you got to play goes and tells others, or goes and runs their own game.
exactly.
So
And
yeah, yeah,
that's I think that's where like we also kind of started off as PanicNot because we were like, oh, we want to do this, but we don't know enough people that do this. So then we're like, okay, let's call 5 people and then 5 more people. And then we started doing like this convention. And it was
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a big tabletop pyramid scheme.
It is a pyramid scheme. But the cool thing is you actually get to go inside the pyramid.
Yes, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Uh so tell me a little bit about your influences. Like what were
Yeah,
you reading? What were you watching when you were younger?
I have such a weird. So many times I'll talk to people. They'll throw out a movie or a show, and I will never I will have never watched it. A lot of classics I had never seen at the time, but it. I have a very and I think a lot of nerds are like this. Have a very obsessive personality. So you find one piece of media and then you exhaust it. You look up
Yeah,
everything about it. You watch every episode. You get all the bonus features, all that stuff. You read about behind the scenes. And then once you've totally done everything, I move on to a different property.
yeah,
And there are
yeah,
a few properties that kind of come up throughout my life multiple times. Things that are, established brands like Transformers were a big influence for me growing up. Loved Transformers, and there's always a new season. There's always new toys. I loved toys when I was a kid. I still have a bunch of stuff nowadays.
yeah.
And then cartoons. I mean, cartoons were a big influence, and I think that the threads of tabletop run through cartoons so heavily. There's lots of heroes, there's lots of big cool monsters that they fight. You have shows like Courage the Cowardly Dog,
Oh
where
yeah,
all of the different characters that pop up in there. Adventure Time, I love Adventure Time, and that ran for, I want to say, probably a decade. Um, and then I have influences for, especially over the past year and a half, have been trying to work more Persian culture into my stuff. So um,
okay,
there's a cultural foundation based in LA, Farhang Foundation, and they have all kinds of seminars and stuff. And at the seminars, they'll recommend books, and it'll have things on like ancient Persian architecture, or they'll talk about stories like Shahnameh, and pulling from those and thinking about how would this be in tabletop, like what would that look like, how could I make this story mirrored in another adventure or something, because they are very adventurous and mythical and magic, and there's lots of creatures and stuff. So that's some of my influences.
yeah. That sounds pretty cool. I think last month we had Bashir Ghosh on, and we were talking to him about like specifically writing about like bringing in ethnic culture into
Yeah.
tabletop and kind of just, but also writing it for like the world to kind of experience. And there was the whole question of like uh how what's the line, like, because there's, if you're writing about your culture, it's easier, but then like so many people have different ideas about different cultures, which are probably not very right,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just kind of breaking that stereotype and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've done some writing for that, especially over the past year, and the ideas of how do you position your material so that somebody who's not familiar with it, or worse, somebody that already has a stereotype established, how can you position that it breaks that stereotype, that that you lead with the things that aren't stereotypical, or showing them what clothing looks like, or food, or just those little things that I think we take for granted a lot in adventures, because in adventure it's who am I talking to, what am I fighting. You don't get the bits of like, oh, like what is a sofre in an adventure, like who's laying out
Yeah,
food. But that's such a critical point in culture, that you got to show it, and you can help use your adventures to break that down. um,
yeah. I love that about food, because like you characters can be so vulnerable around food. People are vulnerable around food because um it's just such a, like, it may not feel like it, but it's such a personal thing to eat.
yeah. You break
But
bread with someone. That's how you get to
yeah,
know them, and some of the best moments that we've had in our campaigns now. And I know not everybody runs a game this way. Is moments where the characters are talking with an NPC around a meal, or you not even beyond a tavern, like being a guest in someone's home, and using that as an opportunity to teach is really interesting. And uh, especially doing it from a here's a culture you might not be familiar with, or here's a culture you might think is the same culture you get in Saudi Arabia is very different from
Yeah.
the culture you get in Iran or Turkey, and to position it that way is it's a challenge, but it's really fulfilling and
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I feel like at least when you start with friends, it's a little less scary because you still have like a collected experience. But then when you start putting out for like a larger world, it becomes a little more, okay, I really need to think this through. Like I really need
Yeah,
to like focus on what's happening. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, speaking of influences and like culture, like have you found that a lot of your experiences and your influences kind of make their way through your work?
Yeah, yeah. So I keep a book with me pretty much anywhere I go. And
I love that.
anytime I'm watching something, I mean, and Chris Perkins has said this in an interview I think he did called Between the Sheets with Brian Foster, where he talks about how
Right.
Brian asked him a question like, "When do you take a break?" And he's like, "I'm always thinking about Dungeons and Dragons." He's like, "Always." He's like, and that's not a bad thing. He likes it, and I feel like I'm the
Yeah.
same way. I'm always anytime I mean, we watched a horror movie last night, The Conjuring. I'd never seen it before. It's super awesome, super
Oh, it's
scary.
so good.
Yeah, it was really good. And I was thinking about the tropes of oh, did I freeze? Oh, I might have froze. Do I need a drop? Am I back? Oh, you can still hear me. Oh, okay. I cannot hear Sean. Oh, okay. Thank you. But I was listening to or watching The Conjuring, and the idea of the two main characters and their kind of their archetypes from a like a TTRPG perspective. There's this kind of seer character who can feel things, and she's an empath, and then you have kind of the skeptical person who maybe is not a priest himself but is ordained by one, and how that would be kind of a parallel between a cleric and a warlock, or how those NPCs could be, is really cool. um I should wait for Sean. Oh, no worries. It's so nice that you have the chat open and I can I can chat with you. My wife, but we watch them together because neither of us can watch them alone. And it was just really well done. And yeah, I won't spoil it, but I thought it was really cool. It's the dread that kind of they built up through the movie is really great. Um, Same, yeah, yeah. I've written a lot of like horror RPG stuff, but not seen a lot of horror movies. Oh, and also thank you about the Curse of Strahd box. It is super awesome. That was my first box that I co-led with Matthew Lillard, and that was a really cool first experience for me. We started that shortly after I started working for the company more regularly. Um,
Oh man. So I my brother bought me that box for my birthday, and it was like I'm so excited. I refuse to run it online because I just want to run this game in person right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's really cool. That's such a classic adventure too. It's a good one to have that box for. We are about to start our third printing of that, so we're really excited that people enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something else. I'm just super excited. And I think from all of the adventures that I've read, I think Strahd has a very special place, just because of the way the character's written and the details and like
Yeah. You have
I
that overlap of like nostalgia from that classic adventure that it was based on, and
yeah,
it's kind of the perfect storm.
yeah. So that's actually great that you brought that up because uh and this was the first adventure that you wrote?
Hmm. Oh, I didn't write Curse of Strahd.
No, did you work I know it was
Oh,
Chris
oh,
Perkins.
oh, oh, oh. I don't know that he. You're saying did Chris? Is this the first adventure that Chris wrote?
No, no, no.
Uh,
Definitely not the first that he wrote. I think, but it was like, for me, it's his magnum opus. Uh,
yeah, yeah. As a
in
lead,
some ways, yeah. Just
it was
because of
Tracy. Was it Tracy Hickman? I think was the original writer and
yeah,
came back on,
yeah,
but Chris came as a lead. I think on that book, and
that book.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's really interesting to see which campaigns resonate with certain like people, like which ones they like, because they're all very different from each other,
yeah.
and the way that they're presented and what they're, I mean, even like the last one that just came out, Witchlight, is so
Which slide?
non-combat, and so I feel like if there's something that you like, there's a way you like to play, I feel like there's a book for everyone in 5e so far.
Yeah. Um. So, but that's great. Like the fact that you know, like I think for me, my experience with Chris Perkins and uh, his work, it starts at Curse of Strahd. And I think from there, I just like, it was a rabbit hole because then I was like, okay, more, 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 more.
Hmm.
And it really hasn't stopped.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, he was showing some stuff last night on Star Frontier. He was looking at some old Star Frontier books that he has. I think he's been in TTRPGs for something like 30 years now. He's because he's been at Wizards for like 30 years, which is
yeah.
the history of what he's gotten to see. I'm really curious about.
Yeah, I think he's seen like this game evolve and change so much,
Mhm.
right? Um, but I think we're veering off a little bit.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
just wanted to ask you about you and how did you start? Like, where did you start writing for TTRPGs? When did this happen? Like,
Yeah, it's funny we were talking a little bit about horror movies because I started writing. I would say we would do a spooky one shot around this time of year, once a year at my table. We kind of step away from whatever campaign we're doing, and I would run them something where they get to make characters, they get to dive through a horror adventure, and I want to say 2017 or 18, we did a one shot and I wrote this stuff out and I had it in my OneNote, and I wanted it to be easier to run, and I thought about maybe giving it to somebody. It's 2018. And I wanted to present it so that if I wanted to share it with somebody else, they could make sense of it. Because, a game master's notes are very different from, you know, writing. If you're writing for
yeah,
your
yeah.
table versus everybody else's, there's a lot of different changes you have to make. So I wrote that, and I had heard about the DMs Guild through Reddit. There's a subreddit, I think it's R D&D Behind the Screen or something, where
Mhm.
it's like a lot of world builders, and they do like cool projects for, like monster atlases and describing things, and it's all open source. And um, I shared it on there, and people really liked it, and somebody was like, you need to put this on the DMs Guild. Have you heard of the DMs Guild? You can make money off of this. And so I went on there and I put the adventure there. I made it pay what you want, and then I went about my life for like another 8 months. until a D&D writer named MT Black was doing a contest for a one-page adventure. And the idea is like you make an adventure and you have to fit all of it down onto a single page of
Yeah.
paper, which is more challenging than I thought it would be at first. I was thinking I could do a single page of anything. So I made a page for that and I submitted it. And I just really enjoyed that process that I wanted to kind of keep writing. And when I submitted it, he had us submit our DMs Guild email address because that's how he would pay people through the guild and send them the copy when it was done. And I went on to my DMs Guild and I saw that I had like $50 on my balance. And I thought that I had been hacked or there was a bank error in my favor or something weird. And it had been people that paid me for that adventure that I had written like 8 months earlier and put on the DMs Guild. People chose to give me $1 or $2, $3. And that feeling of, for the first time, of being paid for creative work was such a positive experience. It was unlike I had never done that before. I didn't think it was possible. My parents growing up had always discouraged me from creative careers. That it was just really cool, and I chased that feeling and just kept writing from then.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, and how do you go from writing that first adventure to, just keep pushing through, keep writing more, and like becoming this kind of phenomenon in on DM skill?
Oh gosh. uh, well, after submitting that one, I decided that I wanted my goal going in was to make something that I'd be proud of using myself. So I wanted it to look nice. I wanted it to have artwork that was specific to it. I wanted it to be printer friendly because when I was back in college, I always was using the school printer bucks to print RPG related stuff. So I wanted somebody else who was doing that to be able to do the same thing. And so I invested kind of most of my freelance money in this project called Devil's Advocate, which was a guide to infernal contracts. And I kind of looked in the DMs Guild. I saw what was there. I was like, okay, people are writing magic items, people are writing adventures. What's something that has never been written here? And what's something that they would that someone would really get use out of? Someone like me who would come on here and I would buy something that I know I'm going to use for years to come. And it was this idea of like warlock packs and devil packs and contracts never really being solidified in rules. And I knew that
Right.
Descent into Avernus was coming out. So I kind of made that and it got picked up by a few websites, and comicbook.com did an article about it, which was really cool to see. And from then on, that project kind of helped fund other ones down the road. We ended up working with Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, on Elminster's
Wow.
Candlekeep
Yeah.
Companion. I partnered, co-authored that one, or co-led that one with Anthony Joyce, who I've worked with 5 or 6 projects now. And as I'm putting out these supplements, people are contacting me to see if I want to do freelance work for them. So while I was writing DM's Guild material, I did some freelancing for a small Kickstarter, and then after kind of other projects got attention, and had done some interviews and kind of was building, I guess, a brand on social media. Other opportunities came up that way, so people would contract me for freelance work on. They kind of like got bigger in scope every time, from like a small Kickstarter that maybe got funded anywhere from like 5 to 10,000 to like eventually writing for Adventures League for Wizards of the Coast for D and
Right.
D, and then this past year, um, writing for articles like Arcadia at MCDM, or writing on their big book that they just released, Kingdoms and Warfare, with Matt Colville and James Introcaso, and there were some other really great authors on that one, Gabe Hicks, Mackenzie De Armas, Celeste Konowich, people that I looked up to as I was getting my start, are now my peers, which is which is really humbling and also really awesome. So
Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty cool. Um, so coming back to DM's Guild, like it's a very specific kind of writing, right? Like
mhm.
because like for any other kind of TTRPG is going to be different. But when you're writing on DM's Guild, you need to be very specific. You need to kind of like be very focused on a certain aspect. Can you like maybe shed a little more light on that?
Yeah, and I'd say that in tabletop in general, if you're wanting to write in tabletop, that doors are always closing and opening. And I would say that even the way I got my start 2 years ago, I don't think that I could do it the exact same way today, and that would still work. I think that the quality of the supplements has gone up on there, and some things have become more standard that were once optional. Um, but I'd say if you're going to publish on there, you should think about having an idea that is different from what else is there. There are a lot of products that are, magic items or a collection of monsters, and people are going to want those products, and they're going to get on lists for people that they've already bought their previous ones. So I think 3 of the top 20 products right now are expanded monster manuals by the same creator, who's made some really awesome stuff. You should go check those out. Monster Manual
Yeah.
Expanded. At the same time, one, you should write what you're really passionate about, and don't be dissuaded if what you want to do is a monster manual product. Like, you should do it, and you should do it in your own way and make it yours. But also, there's like another supplement that I saw went probably platinum by now, was um, a supplement on locks and doors. Somebody who just thought, what are all these different ways we could present doors? Doors are so common in Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and that
That's
product
pretty
took
cool.
off, and I think because it was so specific and
Yeah, yeah.
so interesting, that people were like, "Oh my gosh, you did a whole supplement on doors!" It makes you want to check it out, and it turns
I
out
would
it's a
check it
great
out
product.
because yeah, it's such a great idea because like you know there's if you were to think on the fly of about doors that you want, like I would be able to think of maybe 4 5 different things to do, you know?
Yeah, it's a good product, and I can't remember that creator's name, but they kind of have approached other things with that creativity, and I think that, in a world where everybody wants to write in games, that's a good way to set yourself apart, is to show that your ideas are different, that you bring something new to the table, and whatever you do, that you do it, you put your heart in it, and you do the best that you can, of course. Um, those kind of niche, interesting ideas, I think, when deciding what you're gonna make, I think can really elevate your project before it ever begins. And then whatever you do, staying true to it and starting small. Like, if you know you're going to do a supplement of a certain kind of magic item, maybe you're not just making 10 unrelated magic items. Maybe you're making 10 magic items that are for giants. Um, that your theme stays in there, and you don't keep adding to it, because that's the one mistake I think I see a lot of people make, that kind of
Yeah.
gets them stuck in a rut, is have a big idea, and they keep adding to it, and they keep adding to it, and it becomes something that they work on for 5, 10 years, which it certainly could come out and be like that person's amazing, breakout known product. Like the guy who wrote Squid Games, I think, was trying to pass it
Yeah.
to networks for like 10 years. But in this industry, there's so many projects, and they come up, and they cycle through so often, that to stand out, you need something really special. So what I would say is to pick something small, do it really well, and concentrate it in there before you move on to the next thing.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah,
Uh
thanks.
yeah, because I know that especially a lot of people here also like are there are a lot of creators here that have so many different ideas that uh like some of them in fact are even published like Ragib and Alika, they have published stuff on DM Skill
Awesome.
and they just continue to keep writing and they have so many different things and so many cool things that they're writing. Uh So yeah, I think that's super helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and I'd say too, there's a lot of competition. Well, competition is like a very, very businessy term, but there are a lot of writers that are producing regularly on the DMs Guild. It can feel hard to stand out sometimes. So think about how you'll advertise your product. Think about how you'll get it in front of new audiences, and sometimes the concept alone is what will set it apart. But um, I know plenty of people who had 10, 20 DMs Guild projects before they ever did any writing for uh, a company like Cobalt Press or um, like MCDM. There are people who are now who announced like yesterday that they've been writing for Arcadia that I know have 10, 20 projects on itch. So if your first project doesn't break out, just focus on what you did right and what you can improve on and go to the next one. And that's the benefit I think as well of doing something small is that you don't burn yourself out. You can keep that backlog of ideas that you have fresh. You can write about things that you are excited about and you're
yeah,
not kind of chained down to a big 200 page supplement that you really feel like you need to do, but day by day, there's only so much light coming from that you wish you were doing something else sometimes. But if you work on
yeah,
something
yeah,
small, you can finish it, you can publish it, and then you can move on to the next one, finish it, publish it. And maybe if you're lucky, one of those, is a huge breakout project and that opens more doors for you.
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I I feel slightly personally attacked because I've been working on that 200-page supplement,
Oh,
but I think no, no. But I think about 3 4 months ago, like we also kind of decided, okay, this is going to take time,
yeah.
so it's going to be better if we start releasing smaller parts of this,
Yeah,
so that
yeah, for sure.
eventually when that bigger supplement comes out, you already have like some footing out there.
Yeah, you can build an audience. I think that's a great way to do it too, especially if like chapters are self-contained. You can release a chapter as its own supplement and be like, this is part of a larger work coming out. And I think like collaborating with others like is a big thing that I think people take for granted too. There are a lot of creators I think who work in a vacuum, but when you're on a TTRPG project, you're working across so many fields. You work with editors, you put in art orders sometimes, you have a lead, your work is going to go through so many people. Um, that it one, your ideas are going to be better if you work on a team because you're going to elevate each other's ideas and you can put things in front of somebody else that maybe you might not see. Um, and it'll make you a better creator. But also you're kind of training yourself for a bigger job in this industry.
Yeah,
Because when that day comes, you're going to be working on a team of 10, 15 people. You know, play testing your ideas and bouncing them off of people. And so if you're used to kind of working in your own corner, that might be a hard transition for you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's good advice. So you mentioned something about marketing and advertising your product.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any specifics that you can think of that work well when it comes to like
Yeah,
marketing
yeah.
for TTRPGs?
We did a panel for D&D Celebration last year. It was Lisa Penrose hosted it. It was Celeste Konowich, me, and Ashley Warren, who leads the storytelling collective that was previously the RPG Writer Workshop. Um, and Ashley has a whole section of that workshop on marketing. But that is I think that's an area that you if you're planning to sell your projects, that you always should think about how you're gonna tell others about it. I think that's one really important area that comes at the end of all your work that
Yeah,
can really make or break it. Even there are so many really great ideas out there that people just don't know about because the marketing for it is needs some work. Um, I would say, start building an email list up. There are some free sites that you can use, like MailChimp is a free site that
Yeah.
you can use to build an email list up to 2,000 subscribers. If you have 2,000 people on your email list and they're people who open your emails frequently or buy your products, that puts you miles ahead in terms of your supplement doing well the day it's released. You can do things like giving out coupons, um, and I've done that for my email subscribers. I'll say, people who sign up for my email list, they get 20% off this. It releases tomorrow, and people will sign up for my email list, and then they will go and they will use that coupon because it's 20% off, and they'll buy it. And if I get 5 people who bought something for 20% off, I did it through my email list. That's 5 people who probably wouldn't have bought this product or not heard of it. So that's a big benefit. And I know there are like people who their whole focus is trying to build their email list. Then I would
Hmm.
say be kind of active on social media and find a way to interact in a positive way with other creators in the field. Because just as you're marketing your products, those interactions, those unique thoughts, those ways that you're boosting other creators, um, they help you get noticed as well. And somebody who looks at your profile and they see that you're professional, that you're kind, that you are plugged into the TTRPG scene, and that you're positive and uplift others, when they're looking for people to bring on a project, they might have your name already. They might, if they know your
Yeah.
work, um, or maybe they follow you on your email list, or you've sent them work in the past. They might thank you for that project, and building your portfolio up like that will help legitimize, excuse me, any sort of freelance project that you do of your own, or any sort of solo project that you might put on the DMs Guild or wherever. So those are two ways that you can market. And then I think the other thing that we talked a little bit about before the call was kind of like the hype cycle to be
Yeah.
aware of. And kind of in a world where there are so many RPGs coming out at once, there are a lot of Kickstarters going on. Um, find out like how you're going to generate hype for your project. Like, if you have 3 unique images, like how are you going to show those images? How are you going to hold some back so that there's still a surprise for release day? When are you going to show your cover? Um, I, I tend to think that it's better to kind of hold your cards for something that's like a DM's Guild release, because the
Right.
algorithm of that is based on sales divided by days that this has been open. So knowing that algorithm, you want to make sure you get a bunch of sales in the early days, so that way your product is looking like this, and will stay at the top of that ribbon longer to keep getting more sales, rather than, you want 50 sales on the first day instead of 10 sales every day for that project.
Every day.
Um, so knowing things like that in mind versus like a Kickstarter where you might be doing a lead up where you're trying to get followers for your Kickstarter that you want to, drive somebody to a page. And I think the biggest piece of advice I can give for the hype cycle of tabletop is, to any time that you post about your project, have an action item tied to it. If you post a new image from your project, have a link in a reply to sign up and follow the project. If you're posting the cover and you're releasing it, tell them where they can go to buy it. If you are promoting your email list, have something that, have a place for them to sign up for it, and then tell them that they're going to get something when they sign up. Because I think a lot of people are just like, "Hey, go do this for me," and that's great. But a lot of people, you want to tie those action items to anything
Right. You
juicy
wanna.
that you put out.
Yeah, I think that's super useful. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm glad you mentioned Kickstarter as well, because I know we've been talking about DM's Guild for a while, uh, but I also wanted to kind of like, uh, you know, broaden that approach in like the whole publishing sphere of TTRPGs. Uh, and you work at Beetle and Grimm's, and uh, I think I asked you about this, but then I decided that it would be more fun to just ask you on the call.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
is that your official title is producer goblin at Beetle
Yeah,
and
yeah. My
Grimm's?
official title is a producer goblin. I have a
What does that
my
entail?
So I am the first full-time hire at Beetle and Grimm's. Our company is founded by five gamers that have gamed together for like 20 years. They all have full-time jobs, ranging from, Matt, who's an actor, to Bill, who manages an emergency department, which is kind of how I met Bill, which because I was in healthcare at the time, doing something very similar. Um, as a producer, I kind of touch every aspect of our boxes, from all the way from like support and being aware of what customers are asking about to uh, um, contacting vendors to get pieces for the box and approve them and working with wizards to make sure that they approve of our concepts. If we show them that, for example, like Descent into Avernus, we make these Hell Rider badges. We submit those badges as a concept, and we work with them to make sure that they're as accurate as possible, and anything that needs to be resolved about it, whether it's the weathering on it or the image or the way it attaches or how it's used, that is up to their standards and our own. So there's some liaison stuff there. I also write for our bonus adventures, and I edit all of those, and work on in-world handouts and make sure that they're, on the right paper and in the right places when they need to
Yeah.
go, and that we're thinking about the timelines of projects and making sure everything's on schedule, and that we are using our own email address signups to let people know about what we're creating. Um, all the way up to the convention side of things, where it's physically engaging with our fans, telling them about their releases, showing them demos of our boxes. So as a producer goblin, I'm like an everything goblin there. And so hopefully this upcoming year, I might step into kind of a, maybe, fingers crossed, lead a box of my own, which would be pretty cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, does Beetle and Grimm's create every box that they put out internally, or do they also like work with vendors and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we have a few vendors that we work with, and because the content of the boxes varies so widely, we're always thinking like, how can we do something new with this? We're constantly working with new vendors. So, I mean, we have a plushie manufacturer, Monster Fight Club, that we used for Witchlight to produce a plushie of this fairy dragon named Sir Talavar that's in that adventure. That was the one that we did. That we used them for Lulu in Descent of Avernus. If you know the little uh, celestial elephant that's in that one,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
she's pretty much actual size. Um, then for like our physical jewelry pieces, we have a vendor for that. But like our in-world handouts and the books that we print, those are done mostly in-house with the company we work with, to actually make
Okay.
all of our box stuff and assemble them.
Okay. Cool. And I'm guessing all of the writing is done by you or like a couple of other people inside, right? If there is
Yeah, yeah.
any
Anything that
missing
we
parts.
add to it, there are some instances where the text is already written in like a D&D book or a Pathfinder book, or like we're partnering with Darrington Press and Critical Role to do the Tal'Dorei
Yeah.
Reborn boxes. And there are instances where the text is already written there, but then there are other opportunities where we can really kind of put our own spin on things and present that in a more interesting way. Like for the Everon box, there were lots of group patrons, and so we wrote a series of very thematic patron letters that they were designed from these different patrons to the players to receive, that invited them to be their, like a member of their group, basically. So there was one that was a newspaper. So the newspaper one was written by Charlie Rahor, one of our founders, and it's very like coffee in hand, like the presses, won't be silenced. You need to, you're going to be overworked, like very kind of like 1920s newspaper vibe.
Yeah.
And then you have stuff like from a thieves guild that it's coded and it's a puzzle in itself to solve. and those are things that we make and design and concept all in house, which is a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So, from somebody who's been a writer, okay, is a writer, but also now is a producer, at Beetle and Grimm's.
Mm-hmm.
If like, if say somebody approached you with like an idea, to create something,
Mm-hmm.
what would be the most? I'm not saying what is the most exciting idea, but what would be the most exciting thing that you would look for when somebody approaches you or presents something to you that just the
Yeah, yeah. This is
checkpoints that you would look out for?
yeah. You mean as a like to write something, or do you mean like in general, like approaches us as a because there's different things. Like I get approached by freelancers who want to write for us, but I also get approached by people who have a craft that they do that is something that we think about putting in our boxes at times.
I would say maybe we can start by talking about in general and then maybe come to writing from there.
Yeah, yeah. So for in general, we want to see what it is you make, to think about it in terms of if you do one thing, we put out a box for, 1,000 to 2,000 people. So what does whatever you make look like, quote unquote mass produced? Um, is it different? Is it something you're passionate about? Is it something that we can recreate for like something that we can skin or present in a kind of more specific way? So we there was a paper crafter, her name is Straya Obscura on Twitter. She makes these really cool like papercraft and foam core boxes. Devin Rue, a cartographer, tagged us to uh, talk about like, hey, like you should include this in your boxes. So we actually had a meeting with her a few weeks ago, and so we're thinking about like what does this stuff she makes look like in one of our boxes because it's really cool, and it's very fantasy, but it's also one thing that we could say it's not something that's so set in one genre that it's stuck in one box. What she makes is something that could go in an Avernus box or in an Icewind Dale box or in
Right.
a whatever they're coming up with next. Um, and because we like working with a lot of different people, we're always kind of open to those ideas. That's one of the benefits I think of working for a company that's relatively young and still somewhat small, is that we're experimenting all the time. And so people who come up and their work is really good and they're passionate about it, we're usually willing to do some sort of meeting and chat with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. And so when somebody pitches an idea to you in terms of writing, what are the things that you look out for? Like if you were to put a checklist and say that, okay, these are things that I feel, uh, would work for us, or and like maybe even like
this
if
is
you
probably
want to
more of a me
dissociate.
question. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, from Beetle and Grimm's as well. Just you as a person, if somebody said, okay, I want to collaborate with you, or this is something that, okay, I have this, and you know, I
Mhm.
want your opinion on this. What are like the first 3 or 4 things that you would look out for?
So 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 for an idea phase, uh, uh, presentation is I want to know what's different about it. In a world where there's a project every week, what will make yours stand out? What and with that, what's the message behind it? Um, I, as a writer and and a producer here, like a supplement of 100 magic items does not excite me as much if they don't have any something tied to them, or an adventure where you go and you slay a dragon. Like does not sound very exciting to me because there are 100 adventures like that. But if it's themed in some way or it's a message, we talked a little bit about culture. Like if this was 10 items from inspired by Persian culture, I'd be very interested in that because that's something that isn't out in TTRPGs right now. It's something that has a clear message, has a purpose, um, I think that's kind of the way I view every supplement. It's like what is the thing that's driving this, and how will this stand out? Because it also goes to us when marketing it is what's special about this, and why does this matter to us more than the other 50 ideas that someone approaches us with. Now, if something is written, um, there's sort of a checklist of stuff. I look to see, who's on it. Do you have an editor? Is does the design work check out? So like, is the way that you're presenting an ability check, is that the way it should be? Does it say make a stealth check, or does it say make a DC number dexterity parentheses stealth check, which is the way that the style guide has it? Like, that's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for too, because that tells me like how, like, your level of competency with the style guide, which not only reflects how good of a, like, a maybe a D&D designer you are, but also shows us how um, how much you rely on templates, and how you use the materials that are kind of distributed by a company for open source writing. Um, so that's kind of on my mind. And then just like, does it flow? Is it clear what this is, and do the chapters make sense if it's got multiple chapters? Or are there things that surprise me as I'm reading it, which I don't want? If I'm reading something that I want to run, it should flow in such a way that there aren't surprises for a dungeon master. There aren't surprises for a reader, because it's a game document, not a novel, and there's some differences there. I hope I answer your question.
Yeah, yeah, I think you did. Uh, so this your answer kind of brings me back to something I read in your blog, which was that you were talking about, while writing adventure, about focusing more on tools, you know, for the
Mm-hmm.
DM rather than the story, because at the end of the day, when you're writing for stuff like DM's Guild, uh, especially when you're writing adventures, you're writing for the DM.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about these tools that you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So for kind of that question, I think it goes back to the differences between writing for your table to writing for every table. And I would say that it's very hard to write an adventure that's a story. You can write an adventure that feels like a story, feels like it sets up for a story, but ultimately it's up to each table to tell the story that they want to tell.
Yeah,
And adventures that force a narrative on you, they're controversial with tables. They don't like being forced into a narrative unless they've agreed upon it at the outset. There are some adventures where um where there are certain assumptions that are given to the group at the outset that I think make a lot of sense, and that's like the importance of session zeros and everything. Um,
yeah,
but things like, you want to think of encounters as situations rather than this will happen. It's, here is the setup, and these are the things that could happen. If you have a room where three goblins are playing chess, in a dungeon, you need to tell people how they're going to come in, how the goblins are going to react, what they want, and how they're going to get it. I think, and those are like the foundations of NPCs. I think that comes from Matt Colville, if I remember correctly.
yeah,
But he says, when I'm designing NPC, I know what they want and how they're going to get it, and that's the two things that you need above everything else. Um, and that's always what I'm thinking about when I design an NPC. Isn't, what is the story that this NPC is going to tell? Because that's not up to me. I know what the NPC wants and what they're going to do to get it. And I might know that at certain points, the NPC might do this if they're still alive, if the party took them here, if they're. And the more that you kind of decide to branch, the harder that your adventure gets to write. Um, there are assumptions in big campaign books that, like, for Chris Perkins, for example, that Chris, has to make sacrifices, because when you're making a 200-page adventure book, there are times where you're going to have to usher them into the next area, and there are choices along the way of how they approach those things, but ultimately that they'll resolve in a certain way. Um, but I mean, is that what you're asking about for tools? Like,
Yeah. Uh, because I know that a lot of people think about the story when writing, and I thought that it was really interesting that you said that, because I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense, because you know, like what you just said, that the players are gonna define what the story is. There's
Mhm.
only so much that you can actually put
Yeah,
in. You're just setting up like checkpoints or like
yeah,
different instances and scenarios, right?
yeah, and
And
you can set things up so that they are more likely to fall in a certain way. You can have an NPC that is, that is more sympathetic at probably most tables if portrayed the right way. And by the right way, I mean if portrayed like you intended it, will interact with them a certain way. You hope that 90% of groups, when presented with a purely kind NPC who does not have malicious intentions, will treat them in a kind way or want to help them, or if this person gives them a reward to do something, that the players will go do that thing. But you can kind of set it up so that, assuming that those things happen, this is the next kind of natural step. But at the end of the day, there are still those 10% of players that will approach something differently, and you want to do as much as you can to kind of mitigate the risk when trying to design for everybody in that way. And I think there are things you can do to input story-like elements and things. I think you can make an adventure really thematic. You can
yeah,
make certain NPCs tied to the theme. If taking Descent into Avernus, for example, there are threads of redemption throughout that entire adventure. There are good NPCs who are a little bit bad, but there are also bad NPCs who have the capacity to do good. And I think
yeah,
that sets you up for that adventure's inevitable conclusion, um, in a really cool way. And I think that if you think about your adventure, you want to always kind of think about it from two positions. And one is the high level, what does this encounter say about everything? Does it need to be here? What's the purpose of this encounter? And then you want to go and drill down into this is how this specific encounter works. Um, I think there's kind of those two levels at all times. The really good designers I've seen, the people that I think have helped me grow as a designer, are the ones who can come back out and think of everything from a high level view. Because I think a lot of designers, we get so into the encounter and the mechanics and what's happening that we build that when we go to the next one. We build that when we go to the next one. But the good leads that I've worked with and the really good designers, they're the ones that step back and they say, I was thinking about this piece as a whole. This encounter here stands out to me because this, um, and here's how we could fix it.
okay. Uh, that's interesting. Which leads me to my next question: is that so? I know that while writing, you can think of so many different situations and scenarios, you know, and you want to put that in, but like, when do you stop? When do you be like, okay, this is good enough?
Yeah.
And, like, if you like, there's no point in doing more than this, or you could do more than this, but like, at this point, it's up to the DM to kind of figure it out, because this is how much he needs. Everything
Yeah,
else
yeah.
is extra, right?
Yeah, and it really depends on the encounter. There are encounters that I think are clear cut, and it kind of goes into the how important is this moment in the adventure. If you are trying to steer the story in some way, and this is a pivotal moment, I would go so far as to dedicate half to a full page for some really, really important encounters.
Right.
So you kind of need to measure up how much weight does this encounter hold, but also are there natural things that these, going back to the goblins, like, do they know what they're doing? And if the DM has enough tools in front of them, if they know what the goblins want, what they interact with, how they get it,
Yeah.
you can kind of step away, and there are different ways to resolve it, because there are also going to be you can't include every scenario. You can't include every character type. You can try throughout your whole adventure. One of the biggest things that I do is when I see a good adventure, I see something I like in adventure, I make a note of it and I put it in a big adventure checklist I have. And there are some of those things that I come back to every time. And there are other things that are more situational. But you can go back over your adventure and you can check it and you can say, is this encounter really necessary? Is it interesting? Does it give an opportunity for the characters to shine? Does it tie well into the theme? And you can kind of go back through, and if something's not clear, yeah, you can add more to it because knowing when to stop is kind of hard.
Yeah.
But that's why we have editors, and that's why we have project leads to help us see those things when we can't.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're getting close to our time. I think we're actually 5 minutes past. But
It's okay.
maybe we can do a few questions from like the audience,
Sure.
and then um so let me just see. So I think this was an interesting one, which is how is it different writing for like a sandbox game, or an adventure versus an adventurer's league adventure, because people are gonna move, that character's gonna move somewhere else, you know?
Yeah, I think of a sandbox as like a collection of situations. Whereas I think of like an Adventurers League adventure as like scenes. Like there are some assumptions that you have between them that the characters are going to go here next. So you always need to wrap it up knowing that this next one is coming in a way that it feels natural to move on to the next. And there's also things in that like time, like making sure that you put the estimated durations of time and that your GM is set up for that. But for like a sandbox, balancing is a little bit harder. You think of like adventures like Storm King's Thunder, where there's literally 164 locations in one of the chapters that
Yeah.
may have as much as a few sentences to half a page to a whole page for an encounter. Um, if I'm writing a sandbox, I go back to if you look at the encounters in Storm King's Thunder in that chapter, they all tie into this theme of giants and giants causing trouble and a problem to fix with this disruptive event happening and the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
So those situations all surround about that. And that's where you can kind of throw your ideas out. In sandboxing, you know that giants are disrupting the land. You can say, I'm going to design an encounter where a giant has stomped on someone's house. The characters come upon the house and they need to fix this. You don't even need a giant for that. And it still falls into the theme of the adventure. It's still really clear. It still signifies to the characters that this is a problem that they need to fix. And it was clearly
Yeah.
giants. Whereas for an Adventurers League adventure, that's kind of more the story, and it's I'm telling this adventure here where the characters are going to eventually fight a giant. Here's the end, and here's the beginning. So maybe they come upon the destroyed house, they see that it's been stepped on, and there's an encounter here that they have with this person, and something happens. Then in the next scene, they're going to be tracking the giant. So they go to this forest. Here's something interesting that occurs here, and it ties in that theme too. Like, oh, bandits have stolen from this house when they realized it was crushed and open. And then in the last scene, you meet the giant. Here's where this is inevitably going to go. And here's how this encounter is different than just fighting a straight up giant. Maybe the giant stomped on the house because they needed to scratch their foot, or, and there's different ways to solve it. So that one has a lot more guidance, has flow to it because it's more of a story. It's an adventure versus a bit that they can come across.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So scenes versus situations. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay. Uh, so the Indian DM, who's uh one of the people in the community here, he has a question which says, what are some good 5e adventures to study, as like a model? Uh, while
I think
writing?
Curse of Strahd is a classic one. And what I like about Curse of Strahd is that it's set up for success in some ways. It's literally like a video game in that there is this mist outside of a location that you can't walk past.
Yeah,
So you don't have to design for outside of that area. It's all local. Um, I would say that good overarching adventure design um, for a sandbox adventure, you're going to want to look at like Storm King's Thunder. It's very sandboxy. There's so many choices to make in that adventure. There are entire chapters that you might not run, depending on what your characters do. For linear adventure, I'd look at is it Tyranny of Dragons? I think is the one after
yeah,
Horde of the Dragon Queen.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
for kind of just general, yeah, I'd look at and for linear, I'd look at Wild Beyond the Witchlight actually, and Witchlight will challenge your expectations about design in a cool way. Witchlight is a great adventure to look at for NPCs and for NPC motivations because all of those NPCs can be approached in a non-combat way, which means that they're thought out to a degree past some of the other ones, I'd say. Um, Cursor Strahd is good because it has a classic structure in a lot of them. I would say in some of the rooms of like, here's the encounter, here's the box text that tells you what the adventurers are going to see, here's the setup that tells you what the GM's going to see, and then here's the information about how this encounter is going to resolve. And you see that kind of recur over and over again. And then Curse of Strahd also has a lot of like classic stuff like here's the location, here's the
yeah,
explanation of the location, here are the major places in the location, and here are things that happen and motivations in them. And once you kind of seen that structure and you're in the mindset of reading for structure, you can go into other adventures and see that too. And I think that like structure is one of the most important things that a writer for adventures can think of because you're not writing a story and you're not writing prose so much as you are thinking about scenarios and setup. And so the organization and how you present that information in a way that it's it makes sense is so important and so often taken for granted. If you read an adventure and it flows and you didn't question it, that's an adventure that you should look at because it's probably written in a really, it's probably organized really well if you didn't
yeah,
notice it. You know, if you're not hunting for information, nothing sounds like, oh wait, what? Then it's probably set up in a good way that it flowed really well, and you should question why did this flow well? Why didn't I, you know, it mentioned things early so I wasn't surprised by them later. You know, it re-explained things. Like when I saw an NPC that I hadn't seen in a couple pages, it re-explained who the NPC was in a couple of words. Those are little things that can add a lot to your adventure that you might take for granted. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I think the first time I was going through like a written adventure myself, uh, I think it was a DM's Guild supplement, and I was like, somewhere somebody asked me something, and this was really early when I first started DMing it, and then I started freaking out. I was like, where is it? Where is it? Scroll, scroll, scroll.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Easy to use. And another thing too is like if you want to write like for game companies, you have to be willing to do that in less pages. Is the thing the you know these things that are really good about it in that there's no page limit for your DM's Guild supplement, there's no page limit for your itch supplement. Those are great, but also you want DMs and GMs and whoever to be able to read your stuff quickly, to get a good idea of what it is quickly, and to run it with a little bit of prep. Because the more pages that you make them read, the less interested they will be in running it, the more confusing it is. And then if you write for a company, you're going to be confined to a word count, and that word count is probably going to be smaller than what you're used to. Um, so yeah.
okay. I think we can do maybe one last question. I think I saw two questions that were talking about feedback. So basically, outside of like the people you're running the game from, is there like a forum or something online which allows you to get like good professional feedback for maybe writing for DM's Guild or something like that?
Yeah. So I wrote a there's a writing your first encounter class for the Storytelling Collective, and I wrote like a section on that was all about like play testing and feedback. There are kind of three major play here. Let me bring it up if I can find it. Not super worried about it. But there are kind of like three places that you can go to get feedback. There's kind of informal feedback, and then there's formal feedback. Formal feedback is like what I think of formal play testing. You know, people have actually read and run your supplement, your adventure. They've used your magic items. That's like what MCDM is doing with all their stuff. They have a whole community of play testers. Their job is to actually put this stuff in their games, see how it worked, see how people reacted to it, and then come back and say either this was well received, this was confusing, this felt too powerful because of this. Then there's the informal playtesting, which is it could be anything from somebody reads it to somebody thinks about the concept. That could be a Reddit forum. That could be somewhere like you're posting on our D&D behind the screen, or you're posting on our D&D, and people are coming back and they're saying, I like this idea, but this, or I read this and it sounds like it's not too powerful. They haven't actually put it in their games, but their feedback is still useful because they might catch something right off the cuff. So places to do that, I think, are any social media platform. There are groups for it. There's like a DM's Guild community that you can see like there's like an unofficial DM Guild Discord where you can go and you can ask questions, and there's a bunch of different chats. You can do it in your own Discord, and in this Discord, I bet you could ask for feedback
Yeah.
on your stuff from other people. You can post it on Twitter, and you can tag it with D&D or writing, and you can say, "Hey, I'm designing this thing. Here's a sample of it. What do you think?" And you can get feedback that way. You can use tools like polls in Twitter. I've done that before in the
Yeah. Yeah.
past, and I think that's where like building an audience helps because that's more people who will see your post, and more people will think about it. Oftentimes I'll post two versions of a design, and I'll say, which do you like better, or which one seems more clear, A or B? Poll below, and then there's a poll, and it says A, B, and I just like to vote because some people they don't really have an opinion, they want to see the results.
Yeah.
Um, and you want to pull them out of your sample size. um, and based on how that poll goes, I will make a change. I'll say, oh my gosh, this was overwhelmingly in favor of A. Or you can do this with like strength of things. Like Jeremy Crawford, who's one of the lead designers at D&D for
Yeah. Yeah.
mechanical stuff, he has said that he knows something is balanced loosely, and half the people complain that it's overpowered, and the other half say it's underpowered. He knows it's right about in the right spot. So if I do a poll and I say this, how do you feel about this magic item? And there's like a just right, too powerful, a not too powerful, and then I just like to vote that pulls those people out again. That if those two extremes are more or less about the same, even
Yeah.
if they're 25% of the audience, that item is probably fine, or that trade is probably fine. And that's informal feedback. That somebody hasn't run it at their table. They're just reading a paragraph um, and voting on it. But that's super valuable, especially if there's a part of your design that you're unsure about. And then the formal stuff, yeah, if you have an email list, you can send out snippets of your thing, and you can include a link to a Google form survey and say, hey, after you've completed it, answer these 5 questions for me. It'll help out. And here's what
Right.
you get from it. You get a free version of the adventure whenever it's made. Include your email address in this survey, and I'll send it out to that list of people when I release the supplement. Um, Hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, that's very useful. Thank you. I think. Oh yeah. So Rajiv says Unearthed Arcana is also a good place to get feedback for homebrew stuff.
Yeah, our
Uh,
Unearthed Arcana is and a general note about Reddit is that they are brutal. So they can be super, super nice, or they can just tear you to shreds. So just when you're doing that, just be ready to have your work absolutely annihilated. And also another thing that I've noticed is and other people who have worked in like coding or anywhere that's got a lot of user interface, um, people are really great at telling you what doesn't work for them. But when they suggest the change, the fix, they're often not right about the way to fix that. So somebody might
Okay.
say, this is something that didn't work in my game, or it was underpowered, or this, and then they'll say, you could make it right by doing this. Just take that feedback that they give you of how to fix something with a grain of salt, depending on who it is. If they're an experienced designer, that's a difference. That's a little bit different, but sometimes people will overcorrect or correct the wrong thing in their suggestions.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. That makes sense. Um, okay, I think that brings us to a close. I would just like to thank everyone that stuck around, even the people who are on YouTube right now, streaming this.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, yeah, thank you for being here, Justice. I'm so glad that I got to do this, and hopefully we can get on a few more calls, maybe even like play a game sometime.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love that.
Yeah, we'll set it up. Uh, Thanks everyone. This was Panic Not After Dark with Justice Arman, and yeah, good night and good morning to you.
Thanks.
Okay.